A book was published recently that got me thinking about my old school. The book was a biography of Robert Edwards Holloway, a remarkable Newfoundland educator. My school, Holloway, was named after R.E. Holloway. Previously, it had been called Methodist College, an institution Holloway led for 30 years. Tonight, with the help of a few Holloway partisans, I'd like to tell you about my old school and the man who gave it its name. I'm on Longs Hill in St. John's, and before I was a teenager, I saw this street almost every day of my life. Holloway School stood on this parking lot next to St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. It was the only school I ever loved. I had good teachers here and made good friends. Holloway was an old school with lots of tradition. I remember every morning we'd have assembly and prayers in the school auditorium called Pitts Memorial Hall. Sometimes we'd have a guest speaker. Tim Horton of the Toronto Maple Leafs spoke to us one morning. And at the end of each class, the grade 6 prefects would run up and down the hallways of the school, ringing a handbell to signal the beginning of the next period. I also wore the school uniform and regulation red and blue tie. We were told when we wore the red and blue to remember our school and to behave properly. Artist Christopher Pratt was a Holloway boy too.
But red and blue means something to me. I'm not sure I've always obeyed his dictum to, to honor it in the sort of Boy Scout tradition of thought, word, and deed. But no, and by the same token, those of us who went to school in St. John's in those years, when I see a combination of blue and gold, like right here in this room right now, I automatically smell St. Bon's. Right. Or two Bishop Field or Bishop Spencer, so it really, really, truly is ingrained.
One of my favorite images of Holloway School is this print, created by Christopher Pratt in 1992. It speaks to his passion for our old school.
Holloway School was the ultimate urban red brick schoolhouse. It was on a grand scale, but it had that feeling about it. It was an absolutely wonderful building, absolutely wonderful. We had 2 gymnasia or gymnasiums. There were several music rooms, as you know, had the magnificent Pitts Memorial Hall. All the class windows looked south out over the harbour, out through the Narrows, big tall windows, sunlight streaming in. It was just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful building and a wonderful experience for a child, and I remembered all of that.
There was a female staff at Holloway when I attended. Dorothy Bradbury, my grade 4 teacher, struggled to improve my handwriting. In grade 5, Lima Davis got me hooked on reading. She introduced us to Dickens' David Copperfield. Miss Davis taught 1,500 children during her career at Holloway, and as you're about to see in this 1984 interview, she loved Holloway School from the very first day.
Well, there are so many years, and the pictures change from the beginning when I walked down the ramp from Harvey Road into Holloway, and I remember distinctly hearing the music from the grand piano floating up from the Pitts Memorial Hall, and I said, I'm going to like it here.
Christopher Pratt remembers one teacher, Helen Leslie, and one day in particular at Holloway.
I remember the Normandy invasion. And I remember Miss Leslie being on the stage at Pitts Memorial Hall and telling us that the invasion had begun, which of course it had hours before we got to school. And I remember, and I shiver as I think of it now, I remember her saying, already thousands of boys will be dead on both sides.
In its early years, one of the reasons Holloway School was so special had to do with its name. Holloway was named after Robert Edwards Holloway, a brilliant educator who taught for 30 years in the building that stood in the shade of this hill. Robert Edwards Holloway came to Newfoundland from England in 1874 to become principal of Methodist College, the school that became Holloway and bore his name. He possessed a great intellect and had many interests. R.E. Holloway was the first to introduce science to Newfoundland schools. Dr. Ruby Goff has just published a biography of Robert Edwards Holloway.
He had students going out looking at a white encrustation on the buildings in town and trying to analyze it chemically. He used the noonday gun as his example of the difference between the speed of light and sound. He looked at the Petty Harbor hills as an example of water power and energy and so on. And then he would take the girls from the home or the college residence out to look at the stars, and he told them that if they remembered their names, that they would be friends for the rest of their lives.
Holloway was also a passionate photographer of Newfoundland, carrying bulky camera equipment and glass plate negatives all over Newfoundland and Labrador. These beautiful images make up an important part of his legacy. Sadly, the school that eventually acquired the name of its legendary principal ceased to exist in 1984, when it was gutted and brought down by wrecking balls. It was a heartbreaking time for those of us who had spent so many happy years there. This is where the rear entrances to Holloway School were located, the covered ramps that led to the top floor of the school. One for the boys and another for the girls up along here. I always left school this way when I was walking home. And of course we'd stop up along here at Rice's for a 10-cent cone of chips and while away a few minutes looking into Lim's window at the naughty novelty items. They sold things like itching powder and fake vomit. I don't think R.E. Holloway would have approved, but we were kids. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at Holloway. See you next time for another memory.